In a world where love looks perfect, the truth can be devastating. She was building an empire, carrying new life, and trusting the man beside her, until one quiet discovery shattered everything. While she dreamed of a future, he had been planning his escape, convinced he would walk away with half
Darling,
of what she
keep
built.
smiling.
But he made one fatal mistake.
We wouldn't want anyone to know our little secret, would
Because what
we?
he thought was his to take was never his
This
to
liability
touch.
clause
And
in
when the
Section
truth comes
4
to
needs
light,
to be addressed
it's not
before we
just a marriage
proceed.
that
I agree.
collapses.
We'll
It's
cap
his
the
entire
exposure,
illusion of
then we
control.
move forward with the signing.
From betrayal to rebirth, this is the story of a woman who didn't just survive. She rewrote the rules of the game. The lesson? Not every loss is a failure. Sometimes it's protection. The strongest foundations are built in silence, long before anyone tries to tear them down. And the moment you choose yourself, everything changes. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and support the channel so we can keep bringing you more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The notification lit up her smartwatch, a tiny, discreet pulse against her wrist. Eliza was standing at the head of the boardroom table, barefoot on the plush carpet, 8 months pregnant, and closing out the single best quarter in her company's history. The first thing she saw was the name of a law firm she didn't recognize. Her husband, Leo, had initiated a wire transfer 4 days ago. 4 days ago, while she was laughing with her best friend, Chloe, over architectural plans for the nursery, while she was beta testing the new software update, while she was picking out a name for their son. He had filed, and he was convinced, utterly convinced, he was about to claim half of everything she had ever created. A tech titan wife, a software empire valued at over $900 million. He'd been working with his lawyers for a year and a half. He had a playbook. He had a folder on his laptop titled The Golden Parachute. There was just one document he'd never seen, one clause signed 6 years ago when Eliza Sterling was 24 years old, and when Marcus Thorne, the most ruthless contract lawyer in Seattle, opened the 300 pages of financial discovery and went looking for the $500 million payday he expected to carve up. He found a joint checking account with $6,800 and a 3-year-old electric SUV. Leo Vance had spent 18 months drawing a map to a treasure chest that was never his to open. And now an arbitrator was about to explain that to him in excruciating detail. Stay with Eliza's story, because what comes next isn't just about the money. It's about the firewalls a woman builds when no one is looking, and the control she takes back when someone tries to burn it all down. Here is what this story will remind you. The most valuable asset you own is never the line item on a public filing. It is the framework you designed in private, the conditions you set before anyone knew your name, and the absolute focus that comes when you finally realize you've been investing in the wrong future. If Eliza's story resonates with you, if you have ever been misjudged by someone who thought they held all the cards, leave a comment below and share your experience. Every story you share helps build this community. Like this video if you're still here, share it with someone who needs this reminder today, and subscribe because every week we bring you a new story of women who were written off and then rewrote the entire game. We'll see you for the next one. The silent vibration was the first signal, the faint, almost imperceptible buzz of the smartwatch against her skin. As Eliza Sterling shifted her balance, trying to ease the ache in her lower back, she glanced at her wrist. 34 weeks. The baby had been practicing his acrobatics all morning, and every part of her felt stretched to a new, unfamiliar limit. Her chief of operations, Chloe, was clicking through the final slides of the quarterly presentation. The boardroom was a glass box overlooking the Seattle skyline, gray water and misty sky in every direction. On the wall-sized monitor was a chart showing exponential user growth. Eliza had built this company, this view, this life, from a single line of code in her dorm room. She was wearing a custom-tailored dress, the one concession to her pregnancy, but still felt the powerful sense of command that came with being in this room. Her phone, lying face down on the polished table, vibrated. She figured it was Leo. He always texted around noon, usually with a picture of a new painting for his gallery, His updates a stark contrast to her world of data points and projections. She was not wrong that it was about Leo, but the message wasn't from him. Eliza tapped the alert on her watch. It wasn't a text message, it was a banking alert, a large wire transfer authorized from their joint investment account. The recipient was Thorne and Associates, PLLC. The memo line was brief: retainer, Vance. Eliza read it twice. She stood there, the ambient hum of the servers in the background, her team watching her, waiting for her to deliver the closing remarks. She read it a third time. Then, with a calm she didn't know she possessed, she turned to her laptop. She tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. She navigated to the King County Public Records portal, and she said to her team, "Just one moment, I think we have a final data point coming in." She typed in his name, Leo Julian Vance. The page loaded. The first result was a court filing. She clicked it. At the top of the digital document was the seal of the state of Washington. Below it, in crisp, sterile font, were 4 words: Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. Petitioner, Leo Julian Vance. Respondent, Eliza Marie Sterling. She read it once. She read it again. Her eyes locked on the filing date in the top right corner. 4 days ago. 4 days ago, she had been at the grand opening for his new gallery downtown. She had been wearing a green silk dress that didn't quite hide her bump, and she had joked about it with the photographer from the Arts Journal. Leo had put his arm around her and said, "She's my masterpiece," and everyone had smiled. That was 4 days ago. He filed 4 days ago. She was standing in a boardroom overlooking a city she felt she had conquered, looking at a digital divorce filing. Chloe said very quietly, "Eliza, should I get you some water?" "Yes," Eliza said. "Thank you." Her voice was completely even. She noted this with a strange clinical detachment. Her voice was a perfect, flat line. She closed the laptop. She turned back to her team. She smiled. She delivered her closing remarks. She looked at the faces of her executive team around the table and thought, "He filed. He actually filed. I am 8 months pregnant and just closed a record-breaking quarter, and my husband filed for divorce." She didn't feel rage. She wasn't ready for grief yet. When she couldn't process emotion, she created strategies. It was how she was wired. A venture capitalist once called it her superpower. Leo had called it cold. They were both right. She made a strategy now. 1, the baby is healthy. Dr. Sharma confirmed it at last week's appointment. Heartbeat like a drum, growth perfect, the baby is the mission. 2, contact Arthur Finch. Arthur had been her attorney since she incorporated as an LLC in her parents' garage. He would have the playbook. 3, the Phoenix Trust is secure. The trust was always secure. She was still running through her mental checklist when the board members started filing out. Chloe came over, saw her face, then glanced at the laptop Eliza had just closed. "Eliza," she said, "let's check the baby's kick count first," Eliza said, placing a hand on her stomach. "Then we can talk." "I'm fine," Chloe said, clearly not believing it. She put her own hand on Eliza's belly, a familiar gesture between them, and a moment later, a firm, rolling kick pressed back against their palms. The movement was strong and sure and steady, a tiny engine reminding her it was not the least bit concerned with any of this. Eliza felt it. She took a breath. The kicking continued. She thought, that is the only data point that matters right now. After the meeting, she walked to the parking garage alone. The cool, damp air of the underground garage felt calming. She got into her car. She put the divorce papers, which she'd printed with a single click, on the passenger seat. In 6 weeks, a car seat would be there. She got in the driver's seat. She called Leo, voicemail. She called again, voicemail. She sat in the silent car with her phone in her hand and the papers on the passenger seat. The low hum of the electric engine was the only sound. Her own breathing. She opened a social media app. A notification from 4 days ago. The gallery's official account had tagged her in a post. In the picture, Leo was raising a champagne flute, his arm around the shoulders of his newest artistic discovery, a painter named Sienna. "Did you see it?" Eliza asked. Chloe's voice came through the car's speakers. "See what?" The final numbers from marketing just came in. They're insane. The filing, Eliza said. Leo filed for divorce. The silence on the other end was absolute, lasting exactly 1.5 seconds. Chloe was a data person too. Then she asked, "When?" 4 days ago, Eliza said. Another silence, this one longer, more calculated. "Eliza," Chloe said, and her voice was suddenly sharp steel. "Does he know about the Iron Gate provision?" Eliza looked at the picture of Leo and Sienna on her phone. She thought about the trust. She thought about Arthur. She thought about the document Arthur had insisted she signed before the company's IPO, the one he called catastrophe insurance. The one that stated that in the event of a dissolution of marriage, her ownership of the company and all assets derived from it were classified as sole and separate property, untouchable. For the first time since seeing that wire transfer alert, something other than ice moved through Eliza's veins. "No," she said, "he does not." She started the car. She drove to Arthur's office building downtown. The glass and steel tower scraped the clouds, a monument to the new money that had reshaped the city. Eliza had been coming to this building for a decade. She knew the hushed quiet of the lobby, the whisper-fast ride in the elevator to the 50th floor. This place, more than any house, felt like the foundation of her life. She parked in her designated spot and walked in. The law firm's reception was a quiet expanse of marble and dark wood, a fortress of billable hours. Arthur Finch was in his late 60s and had the calm, unshakable demeanor of a man who had seen fortunes made and lost 100 times over. He had been her fiercest advocate since she was a 20-year-old with a brilliant idea. He was standing in his office doorway before Eliza even reached it. He was wearing an impeccably tailored gray suit and a pale blue tie, and his silver hair was perfectly styled. He looked at his client's face, then at the single sheet of paper in her hand, and his expression didn't change at all. She pushed the door open wider. "Come in, Ava," Eleanor said. "I'll put the kettle on." "He already has a lawyer. Marcus is ready," Ava stated, her voice hollow. Eleanor paused, a flicker of something ancient and knowing in her eyes. "Come into the kitchen." The kitchen in the Beacon Hill brownstone was spacious and filled with the scent of the lavender Eleanor grew in the window boxes. Ava slumped into a chair at the heavy oak table, the same one where she'd sketched her first blueprints as a girl, the same one where she and Eleanor would review contracts on Sunday nights. She placed her tablet on the polished wood, the screen glowing. Eleanor started the tea. She didn't say a word as she moved, filling the electric kettle, warming the porcelain pot, spooning loose-leaf tea from a tin. She performed these small actions with the deliberate calm of someone who knew that certain shocks required the anchor of ritual. She placed the cup before Ava and sat opposite her. Ava stared at the tablet. She swiped a finger, bringing up the file again, a legal document. She noted the timestamp, 4 days ago. "He sat across from me at dinner 2 nights ago," Ava whispered. "He was asking about the nursery. He wanted to know if the contractor had finished the custom shelving." Eleanor wrapped her hands around her own teacup, her knuckles white, but she didn't drink. "He put his hand on my stomach," Ava continued, her voice breaking. "He felt the baby kick." She stopped, the reality crashing in not as a concept, but as a physical blow. He had already hired a lawyer. He had sat there feeling his own child move, discussing the shelving for that child's room, and he had already set in motion the plan to dissolve their marriage. He had looked her in the eye, his hand on her pregnant belly, and said absolutely nothing. A cold, clear voice spoke in her mind, flat and factual because the truth was too sharp to be handled any other way. Asterisk. He sat right there. He asked about the shelves. He already knew. She picked up her phone, opened her calendar, and scanned the past week. 4 days ago, site visit for the Seaport Tower, lunch with the investors, a 3-hour review of the new zoning proposals. She had been on top of her game, proud of her work, completely oblivious that across town her husband was authorizing legal action against her. 3 days ago, Julian came home late. She had made risotto. The comforting kind, with mushrooms and parmesan. the kind she made when her brain was too tired for complicated recipes. He claimed he wasn't hungry, that he'd grabbed something at the office. He kissed her forehead. She remembered the thought crossing her mind then, that the kiss felt procedural, like a formal gesture marking an occasion. She had dismissed it as exhaustion. 2 days ago, dinner. He asked about the nursery shelves. She'd told him they were scheduled for installation on Friday. He just nodded, his eyes glued to his phone. 1 day ago, a text message at 3 in the afternoon. Asterisk closing a big round of funding. Will be late. That was it. And now, this kitchen table, this glowing screen, this cup of tea. Did you know? Ava asked. Not as an accusation, but from a place of pure, desperate need. Did you even have a hint? Eleanor considered the question with the careful gravity she applied to everything. I suspected he was not the man he showed the world, Eleanor said at last. I simply did not know when he would prove it to you. Ava nodded, staring at her own hands on the table at the brilliant diamond on her finger. Eleanor said nothing about the ring. Marcus is free this afternoon, she said instead. He's waiting for you. Ava's phone vibrated. She glanced down. It was Sophia. There was a link attached to the message. The text read, I'm so sorry. I should have sent this weeks ago. I kept hoping I was wrong. Ava clicked the link. It was an online article from a tech blog about an industry awards gala 6 weeks prior. Ava had missed it. She'd been dealing with a bout of intense morning sickness, and her doctor had ordered a few days of rest. She'd told Julian to go to represent his company. In the photo gallery at the end of the article, a candid shot taken near the open bar, Julian stood with a younger woman, a blonde in a cocktail dress that was a shade too tight. His hand rested on the small of her back. It wasn't the gesture of a boss. It wasn't the touch of a colleague. Ava stared at the image, her mind flashing back to that week, 6 weeks ago. She had been on the sofa, propped up with pillows, watching a documentary about structural engineering, nibbling on saltine crackers because nothing else would stay down. She had messaged Julian at 10 p.m. to say she was turning in for the night. He had replied almost instantly, *sleep. Well, my love. She placed her phone on the table, screen down. There's someone else, she said, her voice flat. At his startup. Yes, Eleanor said, the words soft, as if she had been waiting to say it for a very long time. You knew about her. I suspected, Eleanor clarified. I did not know for sure. Ava picked up her phone and called Sophia. How long have you known? She asked, without preamble. 6 weeks, Sophia admitted. I saw them at that gala. I am so sorry, Ava. I kept telling myself, you were pregnant. You were so happy about the baby. I thought maybe I misread the whole situation. You didn't, Ava said. No, Sophia replied, her voice firm now. I know. I'm so sorry. Ava took a slow, deliberate breath. The inner voice returned, not questioning, but making a simple, clean declaration. Asterisk, I am not crazy. For the last year, I felt something was off, and I told myself I was stressed, hormonal, overworked. I wasn't crazy. I knew. Call Marcus, she told Sophia. Tell him I need him to pull the full Donovan Trust documentation. I want to see every charter, every subcorporation, every single account. I want the complete architectural drawings of my life. Already done, Sophia said. He's expecting you at 4. Ava disconnected and looked at her mother. Eleanor was watching her, her expression not one of pity and not of rage. It was a look far older and more profound than either of those. It was the expression of a woman who had sat at this very table 40 years earlier and learned a devastating truth about the man she had built a life with, and who had risen from that same table the next day and put the kettle on. Drink your tea, Eleanor said, nodding toward the cup. Ava drank. It was hot, a little bitter, and grounding. She glanced at the legal files on her tablet. She glanced at the photo from the gala still open on her phone. She looked at the date on the documents. Then she locked the screen, pushed the tablet into her bag, and stood. I have to go see Marcus, she said. Yes, Eleanor replied. You do. Marcus Thorne's office was on the 21st floor of a skyscraper in the financial district. He had held the corner suite for over 2 decades. The furniture was rich mahogany, the shelves were lined with leather-bound legal texts, and the windows offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor, a vista that made you feel, as you sat in the client chair, that the chaos of the city was something that could be managed. Ava sat across from him at 4:15 in the afternoon. She was still wearing the clothes she'd put on for her site visit that morning. She had no desire to go back to the condo she shared with Julian. Marcus was in his late 60s, a man who had navigated so many high-stakes divorces that he had perfected the art of delivering terrible news with a combination of surgical precision and genuine empathy. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him, already covered in notes. "Before we dive into the financials," he began, "I need to ask, how are you? Physically? The baby?" "The baby is perfect," Ava said. "My doctor confirmed this morning." "Good," Marcus said with a firm nod. "That is all that matters." Then he opened the first file, and they began. Over the next 40 minutes, Marcus laid out the entire intricate structure of the Donovan family's financial holdings. Ava knew the general layout. She'd been the managing partner of Donovan Design for 5 years, but she had never examined it through the lens of a divorce, with the specific aim of determining what her husband's lawyers could legally touch. The answer, Marcus explained in his calm, steady voice, was virtually nothing. The Donovan Architectural Trust had been established by her mother, Eleanor, 35 years ago, following the messy divorce of her brother, which had almost cost the family its flagship commercial property. Eleanor's response had been to build a fortress. She had spent a year with Marcus's predecessor, restructuring every single asset. What Ava Donovan personally owned in her own name as of that morning was this: one personal checking account with a balance of roughly $14,000, one savings account containing just over $5,000, kept low by design, her personal car, a 3-year-old SUV valued at maybe $22,000, her jewelry, and her clothes. That was the entirety of it. What Ava Donovan did not own: the Back Bay condo she lived in with Julian, which was owned by the Donovan Trust. Her substantial income from Donovan Design, which was structured as deferred compensation and paid into a corporate entity, not her personal account. Her ownership share in Sterling Hospitality, secured by the trust. The family estate in the Berkshires, secured by the trust. The investment portfolios managed by the trust's subsidiary firms. The hotel properties across 7 states, all held by various LLCs under the trust's umbrella. The international holdings, same story. Marcus laid it out with precision, page by page, document by document. Julian's attorney, Marcus said, will file for a 50-50 split of marital property. He will anticipate uncovering hundreds of millions of dollars in assets to be divided. He let the words hang in the air. What he will discover, Marcus continued, is a joint checking account containing $4,200 and a 3-year-old sedan. Eliza stared at the papers spread before her. She remembered the first time Julian had asked her about the corporate structure of Sterling Hospitality. They had been dating for 6 months. She had mistaken his questions for genuine interest, believing he was fascinated by her career, that he wanted to truly grasp her world. She thought this was what it felt like to be seen, to be listened to. She had happily explained the entire holding company framework. She had even sketched out the organizational chart for him on a napkin, filled with pride at the parts of it she had built herself. She recalled that he seemed to be taking mental notes. The memories began to seep in, not like a tidal wave, but like a slow, chilling flood. Their first date, he had done his research. At the time, she'd found it charming. He knew her favorite restaurant in Beacon Hill, knew she drank sparkling water, not still, knew she'd gotten her MBA from Harvard. This man, she thought, is so attentive. She now realized this man did his homework. The proposal, he did it at the Berkshires estate in the Rose Garden, down on one knee while her mother watched, weeping with joy from a second-story window. Eliza had been 29. She had just been appointed president of the company. The timing felt like a sign, like serendipity delivering the most perfect version of her life all at once. She now understood he had timed the proposal to coincide with her promotion. The prenup discussion, he had insisted, with what she now recognized as a masterfully practiced sincerity, that he didn't want one. A prenuptial agreement, he'd said, suggested he was already contemplating the end before they had even started. He told her he loved her, no strings attached. She had been deeply touched. That was the first major red flag, Marcus said, as if he were reading her mind. A man of limited means who refuses a prenuptial agreement isn't being a romantic. He's playing a long game. He was strategizing, Eliza said, the words tasting like ash. Yes, Marcus Vance confirmed. The board meetings, about a year into their marriage, he'd asked to sit in on one. She had proudly brought him along. He had asked surprisingly sharp questions about asset ownership and capital improvements. She had seen it as him being a supportive husband, thinking his fascination with her work was a sign of respect. She realized now he was drawing a map. The pivotal moment arrived then, specific and deeply personal. It was a Tuesday night in February 2 years ago. Julian had been away for an art fair in Miami that was supposed to last 2 days, but stretched to 4. His reason for the delay had been plausible. She hadn't questioned it. But when he came home, something felt off. That night, she found herself in her home office at midnight, opening her laptop and typing a search into the browser. Signs your husband is only with you for your money. She saw the page of results and stared, frozen, for about 30 seconds before slamming the laptop shut. A wave of suffocating shame washed over her, the kind that comes when you catch yourself thinking something truly ugly. What kind of person thinks that about their own spouse? What kind of marriage was this if she was secretly Googling such a horrible question in the middle of the night? She closed the computer, went down to their wine cellar, and started rearranging it. The entire cellar. She organized every bottle, cataloging them by region, then by vintage. By 3 a.m, the Bordeaux section was in perfect chronological order. She had never searched for that phrase again. I reorganized our entire wine collection at 1 a.m., she thought, sitting across from Marcus with a mountain of financial documents between them, because I couldn't bear to face what I was really thinking. She said it aloud, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus gave her a knowing look. That's an extremely common coping mechanism, he said. The mind finds ways to protect itself. Mine was protecting the wrong person, Eliza replied softly. After the meeting was over, Marcus walked her to the elevator. He said, Julian's lawyers will move on discovery very fast. They are going to come in expecting a windfall. When they see what's actually on the table, there will be a significant reaction. I need you to be ready for it. What kind of reaction? Eliza asked. The kind, Marcus said, choosing his words with care, that a man has when he opens a treasure chest he's spent years trying to unlock, only to find it completely empty. A sense of relief finally came when Eliza was back in her car in the sterile quiet of the parking garage. She didn't start the engine right away. She just sat, staring through the windshield at a gray concrete pillar, and focused on her breathing. In and out, slow and steady, just as her prenatal yoga instructor had taught her. The baby stirred inside her, a gentle rolling motion, as if Olivia were just turning over in her sleep. Eliza placed both hands over her belly. The concrete wall was immense and gray. The air smelled of cold cement and car exhaust. Somewhere on a level below, a car alarm blared for a moment and then cut out. A fluorescent light overhead hummed a low, constant note. She sat like that for 5 full minutes and didn't allow herself to think of anything in particular. She just breathed, felt her daughter move, and let the grief and the cold and the silence just be, without trying to fix or solve any of it. Then she put the car in reverse and drove. Not to the Beacon Hill townhome she shared with Julian. She drove back to the estate. She wasn't ready to set foot in that house again. 2 days later, Chloe called with something new. Eliza was at the massive oak table in the estate's kitchen, her laptop open as she reviewed the third quarter occupancy reports Chloe had sent over. She was 35 weeks pregnant, had slept terribly, and was eating a piece of dry toast because it was the only thing that sounded appealing. A mug of lukewarm decaf coffee sat beside her. "I have to tell you something," Chloe said, "and I need to state up front that my security team found this completely legally by auditing your home network's data logs. It was all right there in our own system." "Just tell me, Chloe," Eliza said. "For the last year and a half, Julian has been using a specialized app on his tablet to secretly catalog your assets," Chloe said. "Art, antiques, jewelry, furniture." He was creating a detailed inventory, complete with photos and estimated values. "The metadata tells the whole story. We found it when we ran a full security sweep on your home network." Eliza carefully put her mug down on the table. "How much did he catalog?" she asked, her voice steady. "We have identified over 250 distinct items so far," Chloe said. "It's likely there's more." Eliza sat perfectly still. She thought of her home office, the one room in the house she had designed entirely for herself, with the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the good lighting, and the small Degas sculpture her grandfather had given her as a graduation gift. She pictured herself working late in that room, and Julian appearing at the door to say goodnight, leaning against the frame. She had always felt a pang of warmth seeing him there. She had thought, "This is a man who loves me." She had interpreted it as affection. He was appraising the sculpture on her desk. The truth landed like a shard of ice in her heart. "He treated our marriage like an estate auction. I told myself his interest in my life was a sign of love. It wasn't love. It was due diligence." "There's more," Chloe said. "Tell me." He also retained a private forensic accounting firm. "About 18 months ago," Chloe said, "they generated a highly detailed analysis of Sterling Hospitality's public filings and whatever else they could dig up. It's a very professional report, impressively thorough." "And?" Eliza asked. "They got the surface details correct," Chloe explained. "The revenue streams, the property valuations based on public records. But they completely missed the trust architecture. The actual ownership layer is invisible in public documents because it doesn't have to be disclosed. They saw Sterling Hospitality as a corporation where the president personally held a massive equity stake. They assumed I owned the company outright," Eliza said. "Exactly," Chloe replied. "He spent a year and a half constructing a financial profile of you that was 100% accurate on the surface and 100% wrong about who actually controls the wealth." Eliza glanced at the quarterly report still open on her laptop. She thought about Julian at their kitchen island just 2 days before he filed for divorce, asking about plans for the nursery. He had been so placid, so attentive. He nodded as she described the crib she had ordered. He had looked at her with an expression she had mistaken for love. She understood it now. It was the look of a predator who believed his trap had already sprung. He did all his homework, she thought. He spent 18 months on this project, and he still failed the final exam. The next disaster arrived the following morning. Chloe called at 8:30, her voice carefully flat, which always meant the news was anything but. "Julian's attorney is Dominic Shapiro," Chloe said. Eliza knew the name. Everyone in Boston's financial and legal circles knew the Shark. He was a notoriously vicious litigator with a reputation for sniffing out money people thought was perfectly hidden. "He's already filed for formal discovery," Chloe went on. "He's demanding full financial disclosure within 10 business days." "Forward it all to Marcus," Eliza said. "Done," Chloe replied. "But Eliza, Marcus wanted you to know that Dominic Shapiro has never lost a major asset division case. He is going to tear into this from every conceivable angle." "Good," Eliza said. Chloe was silent for a beat. "Good? Let him find everything," Eliza said calmly. "Marcus will give him access to every single thing that exists." There was a short pause on the other end of the line. "Oh," Chloe said, and then, her voice full of dawning realization, "Oh." The predictable attack came the next afternoon. Ava was in Marcus's office reviewing documents when her personal cell phone, not her business line, her personal one, began to ring. A brisk, overly cheerful paralegal informed her that she was calling from Sterling and Locke, Julian's attorneys, to begin a conversation about voluntary asset disclosure to help streamline the discovery phase. They had her private number because Julian had provided it. "My counsel's name is Marcus Thorne," Ava said, her voice perfectly level and devoid of all emotion. "All future communication is to be directed to his office." She ended the call. Marcus, having heard her side of the conversation, jotted down the name of the firm on his legal pad and drew a sharp circle around it. "They're aggressive," he noted. "Yes," Ava agreed. "They think there's a fortune to be found." That evening, Sophia composed a message to Chloe Vance. It was not an accusation or a threat. It was a carefully crafted email. It said, "I am writing to you on behalf of someone who I believe has been impacted by the same circumstances as you. I have reason to believe you have been seriously misled. I think you deserve to understand the full situation." To create a united front, it made sense for them to speak directly. Anya arranged the video conference for the next morning. Elena sat in Anya's stark, minimalist office, a wall of glass overlooking the San Francisco Bay behind them. On the large screen, Chloe appeared, broadcasting from what was clearly her small, cluttered design studio. She looked younger than her 29 years and terrified. She spoke in short, deliberate bursts, as if she had memorized a script and then abandoned it. "He promised the marriage was already over, that the papers were just a formality," she said. "He had a whole presentation deck. He walked me through his financial projections for the settlement. He claimed you had a massive personal stake in your family's design firm and that the law entitled him to half. He had exact figures. He said you two hadn't connected in years, that you were too consumed by your art. He said the baby complicated the timeline, but that you'd be generously compensated for the inconvenience. He told me," Chloe continued, "that after everything was settled, we could start our real life. He had a whole business plan for our future. He'd already scouted neighborhoods for us to live in." She paused, and the distant sound of a city bus hissed through her microphone. "There's a hidden slide in the presentation," Chloe said. "He named it Project Liberty." Elena glanced at Anya, whose expression was like stone. Anya looked back, a silent question in her eyes. "What is it you want from us?" Elena asked, her voice calm and steady. A beat of silence. "I want to be free of this," Chloe said. "I made a catastrophic error in judgment. I thought I understood him, but I was wrong." Another pause. "I found the full presentation deck, the one detailing your finances. He had it broken down by portfolio. When I saw that," she trailed off. "This is not something I want any part of. Would you be willing to sign a sworn affidavit?" Anya asked, her tone shifting from counselor to litigator. "Yes," Chloe whispered. A moment passed. "I am so sorry. I didn't see what he was. I mean, I made my own choices and I have to live with that, but I didn't see this." Elena looked at the young woman's face on the screen. "Thank you for telling us," she said. "We will be in touch." She ended the connection and the screen went black. The office was silent. "Project Liberty," Anya said, the words dripping with disdain. "Of course," Elena replied, turning from the screen. He was already writing on a yellow legal pad. "That will be Exhibit A." Anya looked at her client. "How are you holding up?" Elena considered it for a moment. "To be honest, I'm furious," she said. "I am finally, truly furious. Before, I was just numb and then heartbroken. Now, I'm angry." "Good," Anya said. "Yes," Elena agreed, still writing. "It's about time." Marcus Thorne received the asset disclosure portfolio on a Tuesday morning at 9:15. His associate brought it in. It was a single, surprisingly slim, leather-bound folder. "From Anya Sharma's office," the associate said. "A courier just dropped it." Then he left. Marcus looked at the folder. He was used to receiving disclosures by the boxload. Voluminous files meant complex assets, and complex assets meant a landmark case with a monumental fee. He was looking forward to this. He poured himself a fresh coffee from his carafe. He opened the portfolio to the index page. He began to read. He turned a page. He turned several more. His coffee grew cold beside him, completely forgotten. The first section, personal bank accounts, one checking account, one savings account, both with unremarkable balances. He noted the savings account with a slight frown. $4,217. That was the kind of money a grad student kept, not the heir to a design empire. He flipped to the next section. Personal property. One vehicle, a 20-year-old Volvo. A jewelry inventory certified by a gemologist totaling $63,000, most of which was noted as inherited pre-marriage. He flipped past an inventory of personal effects. He was searching for the main event, the equity disclosure for the Rostova Design Group, the real estate holdings, the investment portfolios, the executive compensation details. He kept turning pages. He went back to the front. He reread the cover letter from Anya Sharma. It was 3 paragraphs long, written in the precisely measured language of a lawyer who had been waiting for a very long time to send this exact document. The letter affirmed that the disclosure represented a complete and legally verified accounting of all personal assets held in the name of Elena Maria Rostova. It confirmed that the disclosure was prepared in full compliance with the court's discovery orders. It noted that identical copies had been filed with the court. It wished Marcus's office a thorough and productive review. Marcus sat at his vast mahogany desk with the portfolio, his cold coffee, and a few dozen pages of almost nothing. He picked up his phone. He dialed Julian. Julian answered on the first ring, his voice buzzing with anticipation. "Did you get it?" he asked. The sound of a man expecting a winning lottery ticket. "I received a disclosure," Marcus said, choosing his words with the care of a surgeon. "Julian, I need to be very direct with you. Does your wife have a trust?" A second of silence. "Her family is old money," Julian said. "They're worth hundreds of millions. The firm alone—" "Her family," Marcus interrupted, "may very well be worth hundreds of millions. Her family's trust, her family's firm, her family's holdings." He let the words hang in the air. "Your wife, personally, in her own name, according to the most recent and verified documentation provided by her counsel, is worth approximately $67,000 in liquid and tangible personal assets." The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It wasn't the silence of surprise. It was the sound of a man's entire reality collapsing under immense, unforeseen pressure. "That's impossible," Julian finally said. "I have a leather-bound portfolio of legal documents that says it is," Marcus replied. "I need you to tell me everything you know about her family's trust structure. Everything." Meanwhile, at her family's estate overlooking the Golden Gate, Elena was on the phone with Anya. Anya had a contact at a firm that shared a building with Marcus Thorne. It wasn't spying, not really. It was simply the way this city worked, a network of people who had known one another for generations. The source had called Anya at 9:45 to report that Marcus Thorne had been cloistered in his office with the disclosure portfolio for 45 minutes and had refused all other calls. Elena listened to this. She didn't feel a sense of victory. Not yet. She felt something heavier, something more real than triumph. She thought about 6 years ago. She remembered the first time Julian had laced his fingers through hers over a small table at a cafe in Lincoln Park, his eyes holding a look she had mistaken for devotion. She recalled the early years, lying beside him in the quiet dark, tracing the line of his jaw while he slept and thinking, asterisk, he is the one I've been waiting for, asterisk. She remembered confessing to her Aunt B over the phone, her voice a whisper in the back office of her gallery, I think this is it, B. I think he actually sees me, not the Vance Gallery, not the family name, just me. She had yearned so deeply to be truly seen that the wanting had blinded her. The voice in her head offered no comfort now. Asterisk I knew, not the specifics, not the detailed spreadsheets or the meticulously planned exit strategy, but I sensed what I represented to him. I simply chose to look away because facing the truth was too devastating. That wasn't a flaw. It was a human impulse. But it was also finished. 2 days after the digital files were discovered, Julian made his critical error. He sent a message to Clara's official gallery email, not her private one, the general inbox. He marked it urgent. Her manager, Maya, flagged it and forwarded it to Clara, who was in the middle of a budget meeting with Maya and 2 senior curators. Maya watched the email notification pop up on the projection screen. She glanced at Clara. Clara opened the message and, without a conscious thought, clicked to share it on the main screen for everyone to see. Perhaps it was a deliberate act. She wasn't entirely sure. Julian's words filled the digital space. He was unraveling. The poised, charming man who had sat across from her at brunch asking about nursery colors was gone. In his place was someone desperate and frantic. "You hid the inheritance," the message read, without any preamble. "I have provided a full and legal accounting of every asset under my name," Clara typed back, her fingers steady. "You know what I'm talking about," he replied almost instantly. "The family trust, the gallery's holding company. You knew what the arrangement was." Clara looked across the conference table at Maya, who was watching her with a perfectly neutral expression. "Yes, Julian," Clara typed. "I know exactly what you were expecting." A pause. "This isn't finished," his next message appeared. "My lawyer is filing a motion. The trust is a fraudulent transfer. He has proof." "Marcus will be eager to hear from him," Clara replied. She closed the laptop. The conference room was utterly still. One of the curators cleared his throat. We'll need a record of that email exchange," Marcus said, appearing in the doorway. He had arrived 2 minutes earlier, unnoticed by anyone. "That entire thread is a clear admission of his financial expectations from the marriage. It helps us immensely." "Our server automatically archives all official correspondence," Maya said. "Perfect," Marcus replied, stepping into the room and placing his leather briefcase on the table. "Now let's discuss this fraudulent transfer claim." 11 days after the divorce papers were served, Clara returned to the penthouse. Not just any home, but the one she had shared with Julian, a sprawling residence on the Gold Coast technically owned by the Vance Family Trust, which meant it wasn't a marital asset to be divided, yet in every other way it was hers. She had selected the artwork, commissioned the furniture, and nurtured the orchids in the winter garden because she had believed, we will be here long enough for these things to take root. Julian had moved his belongings out 4 days prior. She didn't know his new location and had no desire to find out. The penthouse was silent with the distinct hush that settles over a place. When a person who once filled it with noise is gone, it wasn't calm, just hollow, like a body that is outwardly healthy but senses an internal loss. She moved through the rooms one by one. She stood in the vast kitchen and switched on the espresso machine, just as Bea had taught her, saying, "Your hands always need a task." She stood in the great room, looking at the shelves where his architecture books were interwoven with her art histories, and thought, "I'll have to separate those asterisks." She paused at the entrance to what had been his study, staring at the empty desk and the faint outlines on the silk-paneled walls where his framed accolades had hung, and felt an absolute blankness. Then she walked toward the nursery. The nursery was painted a soft, ethereal gray, the shade of the Chicago sky over the lake just before a summer storm. The paint swatch had been named something whimsical like Morning Fog, and Clara had held it up in the natural light for Bea, who had nodded and said, "Yes, that's the one." The custom-built changing table had been delivered on Thursday, crafted from pale maple with small brushed nickel handles shaped like clouds. It rested against the eastern wall. Clara traced the smooth edge of the wood in the dim light, feeling the cool, perfect finish. The mobile suspended over the crib featured small, hand-blown glass teardrops in shades of white and silver. She had commissioned it from an artist in Wisconsin. The books on the shelves were organized by the color of their spines, not by title or author, because she had wanted the room to feel like a visual delight for a child. She sank into the rocking chair, a perfect replica of the one from Bea's own nursery, built by the same woodworker who'd made the dresser. It molded to her body perfectly. When it was delivered, she had tested it and thought, asterisk, I could spend hours in this chair, asterisk. She did not sleep. She sat in the gray room at 11 p.m., then at midnight, and then at 1 in the morning, watching the glass teardrops gleam and listening to her own breathing. The ambient sound machine, which the delivery team had forgotten to turn off, emitted a soft hum. A small sachet of dried chamomile, which Bee had tied to the window lock, gave off a faint, clean scent. Outside, the city hummed with a distant, steady energy. A siren wailed far away. The modern building made its own quiet noises, the subtle groans of steel and glass settling under the pull of gravity. She spoke to Sophie. I knew, she murmured, her voice barely a sound in the dark room, lit only by a nightlight Maya had installed, a little glowing star that projected a soft constellation onto the ceiling. Not all of it, but enough. I knew something was deeply wrong, and I chose to ignore it because I was so weary of being alone. Sophie shifted inside her, a slow, liquid turn that felt like a somersault. I had built this huge world for myself, Clara whispered, a whole gallery, a reputation, and I was so tired of being the only one in it. I just wanted someone to come home to. She fell silent, thinking of the late-night scrolling through his old social media, of the perfectly arranged spices, of the 1,000 tiny instances where she had made a conscious choice not to see. The most honest thought, the one she had never spoken aloud, surfaced then. At some point, being loved by the wrong person had started to feel safer than being seen by no one at all. That was the real misstep. Not trusting him, but needing to trust him so badly that her need became a reason to stop paying attention. She let that truth settle in the quiet room. It sat with her, free of judgment. The glass teardrops were still. The starry nightlight glowed. Sophie turned again. I curated my own prison, Clara said softly. I built the beautiful cage, called it a life, and then I was shocked when the man I handed the key to used it to lock me in. She took a deep breath. But you, she whispered, her hand resting on her stomach, you are not a mistake. You are not a footnote in someone else's agenda. You are the single best decision I have ever made, and I made you all by myself. I would choose you 1,000 times over. Sophie gave a decisive kick as if in agreement. It was nearly 3 in the morning when Bee appeared in the doorway. Clara hadn't heard the chime of the elevator. The doorman must have let her up. Bee wore a long silk robe and had clearly driven over from her own apartment. She didn't say a word, just walked over to the wide window seat and gazed out at the glittering city skyline. They sat in silence for a long time. Were you ever scared? Clara finally asked. After Richard left? Bee considered the question with her usual gravity. The first morning after he was gone, she said, I was paralyzed with fear. I was 44 years old with 3 kids and a studio to run. And I sat on the floor of my empty apartment and thought, who am I now? Who am I if I'm not his wife? She paused, her gaze fixed on the lights of the Hancock Tower. And then the sun came up, she continued, and I got up and made coffee. And the next morning, I did it again. And the morning after that. She turned to look at Clara. You don't figure out who you are in the darkness, staring at the walls. You figure it out by getting up every single morning and making the coffee. I'm so scared, Bee, Clara admitted, her voice cracking. I know, Bee said softly. Not of him, not of the legal battle. I'm scared of doing this wrong, of Sophie needing something I can't provide. Every mother who has ever lived has been afraid of exactly that, Bee said. The good ones, at least. The quiet that settled between them was the most peaceful moment of the entire ordeal. Bee fetched a cashmere throw from a chest in the corner and draped it over Clara's shoulders. They sat together in the gray room in the heart of the sleeping city. While the sound machine hummed its steady tune and the faint scent of chamomile hung in the air, Sophie moved within her mother, and the starry nightlight cast its gentle glow upon the ceiling. They didn't speak again for nearly an hour. Clara eventually drifted off in the rocking chair. When she awoke to the soft gray light of dawn, Bee was gone. Her phone buzzed on the nearby table. A new message from B. It said, "Coffee is brewed. It will keep." Clara sat in the rocking chair in the quiet gray room and felt a subtle change inside her. Nothing was fixed, nothing was resolved, but something had shifted. She placed a hand on her belly and felt Sophie stir, ready to face the morning with her. She thought, "Asterisk, all right. We know what to do now, asterisk." She stood up and went to pour the coffee. The video call with Isabella was scheduled for a Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. Clara was in Marcus's conference room, with Maya seated beside her. The room was immaculate and still, and the afternoon sun streamed through the towering windows, casting long, deliberate shadows across the polished table. Isabella's face appeared on the large screen, live from her design studio. The faint sound of a siren could be heard in her background. Elena had started to see it as a turning point, the constant hum of the city bus in the background of Chloe's difficult confessions. Chloe spoke for 20 minutes straight, an unbroken torrent of words, as if she feared pausing would mean she'd never start again. She wasn't reading, she was reliving it all out loud. Julian had told her 8 months prior that his marriage had been a hollow shell for 2 years. He'd painted Elena as brilliant but detached, someone who loved her canvas more than her husband, someone who had never truly allowed him into her world. He'd said all of this with the pained expression of a man who had suffered in silence for far too long. He showed her the presentation 6 months ago. He'd placed his laptop on Chloe's small kitchen table and opened the file with the gravity of someone sharing a sacred text, something that proved the depth of his commitment. The presentation deck was full of tabs. There were slides with projected settlement numbers. There was a section for post-divorce budgeting. And then there was the hidden slide titled Project Liberty. Within 60 days of filing, he'd told her, we'll be free. He told her they could start looking at penthouses. He sent her real estate listings in Pacific Heights. He made her feel like the one, Chloe said, like the person he was finally getting to choose now that his hands were untied. And then, Chloe said, 3 weeks ago, I stopped by his condo unannounced. He was on the phone with his lawyer, Marcus Thorne. I overheard bits and pieces. A pause. He was rattling off your assets like he was reading a cargo manifest. Square footage, account balances, equity shares, like inventory. She stopped. The presentation was still open on his laptop, the one about you. I read every slide. The distant bus rumbled past again. The very first slide, Chloe said softly, was titled The Pitch. Elena looked at the darkened screen of the monitor. She looked at Anya, whose jaw was tight with a cold fury. What do you want? Elena asked again, though she already knew. I want out, Chloe repeated. I'm not asking for a thing from you, not money, not a safe house, nothing. I just want out of this whole mess. I made some terrible decisions, and I know what comes with that, but I can't be involved in what he's planning. A shaky breath. And I felt you deserve to know who you're really married to. Are you prepared to give a sworn deposition? Arthur asked. Yes, Chloe replied. And after a moment's pause, she added, Is the baby all right? Is she okay? Elena was stunned. The question was so out of left field that she couldn't immediately form a response. The baby's fine, Elena said, feeling a protective hand go to her stomach. She's healthy. Good, Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. That's good. Thank you. We'll be in touch to arrange the deposition, Arthur said. He disconnected the call, plunging the office back into silence. The Project Nightingale files, Simone murmured. Yes, Arthur confirmed, already typing. That, combined with the encrypted chat logs and the off-books condo lease, paints a damning portrait of premeditation. Elena rested her hands on the cool surface of the conference table. She kept hearing Chloe's voice, the raw fear and palpable regret in it, the question about her baby. She thought of being 24 years old. She thought of believing the narrative you had to believe, of picking the version of reality that made you feel special instead of exploited. Elena had constructed her own version of that fairy tale once. She recognized it. That didn't mean she forgave Chloe. Forgiveness was a much bigger undertaking than a 20-minute phone call. But she understood. Simone asked softly, "Elena, how are you holding up?" "I'm laying a foundation," Elena said. "I can feel it taking shape. It's not the life I thought I was building, but it's mine." The narrative shifted to the small, private acts of taking back control. They weren't grand or public gestures, just quiet fortifications. She systematically reset her passwords for everything, not because she believed Julian had them. He didn't. But because every new password was like another deadbolt sliding into place on a door only she had the key to. She scheduled a board meeting for the foundation for the upcoming Tuesday. Not an emergency session, just a standard quarterly update, moved up a week. She composed and sent the agenda herself instead of having Simone do it. The deviation from routine was noted by the board members. She called Isabel. Her mother picked up on the third ring. She used that carefully neutral tone she always adopted when she couldn't gauge the emotional climate of a call. "I just wanted to let you know," Elena began, "that the legal side of things is handled, the baby is healthy, and I'm at the Atherton house now." A brief silence. "I'll be there in the morning," Isabel stated. "You don't have to do that." "I'll be there in the morning," her mother repeated. But this time, her voice had shifted. It was the sound of a decision made, not open for debate. Isabel arrived the next day, settling into Rosa's sunlit kitchen, sipping tea and saying very little, which was both her way and precisely what the moment called for. She brought peonies from her garden and arranged them in the tall glass vase on the kitchen island. She sat opposite Elena, her gaze steady, carrying an expression her daughter couldn't quite decipher, but felt like an unspoken offer of support. "I should have warned you more directly," Isabel said after a while, her eyes fixed on the flowers, "about what I saw in him." "What did you see?" Elena asked. Isabel carefully centered her teacup on its saucer. "I thought he was observing you." She said right from the very start, "I thought he was learning you, but in the way one learns an asset they plan to acquire." Elena stared at her mother. "I believed he was your choice," Isabel continued, "and I didn't want to be the person who—" She trailed off, glancing back at the peonies. "I should have spoken up anyway." "Maybe," Elena conceded, "but I don't know that I would have listened." Isabel looked back at her and something in her expression shifted, not softening, but becoming more open. "No," she said with certainty, "you probably wouldn't have." That evening, it was just Rosa, Isabel, and Elena at the large kitchen island. They had pasta, wine for the two older women, and mineral water for Elena. The conversation drifted from one safe topic to another, the way people talk when they are treading carefully around each other while also figuring out how to stop. It went on for 2 hours. The scene itself was the point, the image of 3 generations of women at a table, being cautious and flawed and simply present for one another. It was a tableau that needed no explanation. Every woman who's navigated complicated family dynamics has sat at a similar table. The chapter concluded with a call from Arthur after dinner. Marcus Thorne had officially filed the motion to contest the Vance endowment, arguing it was a fraudulent conveyance. His position was that the endowment was deliberately structured to shield assets from any spousal claims, constituting a fraud against the marital estate. "It's a long shot," Arthur said, "but the motion forces a hearing. That means a courtroom, and that means Julian will be there." A beat of silence. "I know," Elena said. "Are you ready for that?" Elena looked at the pink peonies in the glass vase, their petals catching the evening light. "Yes," she replied. "I've been ready for that since I found the tablet." The family court hearing room was depressingly small. It had cheap wood paneling, 4 rows of benches, and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, casting a sterile, institutional glow on everything. It was the kind of place where lives were irrevocably altered without any of the ceremony such moments are supposed to have. Elena arrived with Arthur at 8:45, 15 minutes early. At 37 weeks pregnant, a persistent ache had settled low in her back since the early morning hours. Her doctor had assured her it was normal and would only become more pronounced. She wore a tailored navy blazer that, to her relief, still buttoned over her bump, and her hair was tied back in the severe knot she favored for foundation meetings. She took her seat at the respondents' table with Arthur, methodically arranging her files as she surveyed the room. Simone was in the gallery. Rosa was there too. She had asked them both to attend not for comfort, but as a silent presence, a testament. Isabel was also in the gallery. Elena hadn't directly invited her. She had simply told her mother the time and place of the hearing, and Isabel had appeared. That, Elena realized, was a statement in itself. Julian arrived at 9:02, accompanied by Marcus Thorne. He wore a charcoal suit, but his tie was askew. She registered the detail with a clinical detachment that surprised her. 6 months ago, she would have instinctively reached out to fix it. This was not 6 months ago. He never once glanced in her direction as he walked in. He sat at the petitioner's table next to his lawyer, organized his own set of folders, and stared straight ahead at the judge's bench, pointedly ignoring her. Judge Ramirez entered precisely at 9. She looked to be in her late 50s, with an air of someone who had presided over family court for so long that she had witnessed every conceivable version of human heartbreak and betrayal. She had steel gray hair, sharp reading glasses, and moved to the bench with the no-nonsense efficiency of a person with a packed schedule. Croft versus Vance, she announced. Petitioner's motion regarding fraudulent conveyance and the Vance family endowment. Mr. Thorne, you may begin. Marcus Thorne rose to his feet. He was polished. Elena had expected him to be good, and he was. He laid out his argument with technical mastery and an air of unshakable confidence. He contended that the Vance family endowment, though established before the marriage, had been modified in ways that intentionally shielded marital property from spousal claims. He produced records of trust amendments. Some were dated just 4 years ago. He had expert witnesses on standby, ready to testify about standard trust practices. He spoke for 22 uninterrupted minutes. When he concluded, Judge Ramirez peered at him over her glasses for a long moment. "Mr. Finch," she said, "your response?" Arthur stood. He presented a single item to the court, one solitary bound document, the original charter for the Vance family endowment dated 31 years prior. "Your Honor," Arthur said calmly, "the Vance family endowment was chartered the year my client, Elena Vance, turned 2 years old. She met the petitioner 29 years after its creation. The endowment has certainly been amended over time, as any such living trust would be. But its core ownership structure, the very structure Mr. Thorne claims was engineered to defraud the marital estate, predates this marriage, any thought of this marriage, and in fact, predates my client's entire adult life by nearly 3 decades. He sat down. Judge Ramirez studied the document. She lifted it, looked at the date, and set it back down. She then looked directly at Marcus Thorne. The courtroom fell silent. It was the unique kind of silence that descends when a complex issue has just been made brutally simple. "Counselor," Judge Ramirez said, and her voice was dangerously level, the kind of tone a person uses when actively choosing not to yell, "are you seriously asking this court to find fraudulent conveyance in an endowment that was established 3 decades before your client even met the respondent?" Marcus Thorne's mouth opened, but no words came out. "I want to be perfectly clear," the judge continued, "on my understanding of your claim. So please, explain to me precisely what specific fraudulent act you're alleging took place and when." Thorne tried to recover. He pointed to the amendments. He highlighted the timing of the most recent one, which took place 2 years into the marriage. Judge Ramirez then asked Arthur to address that specific amendment. Arthur produced another document showing that the amendment in question was a routine administrative update to the Board of Trustees' succession plan, prompted by a retiring board member, and had absolutely zero impact on the endowment's beneficial ownership structure. As for the asset division, Judge Ramirez reviewed the submitted documents. "Motion denied," she declared. Julian's lawyer, Marcus Thorne, pivoted to his second line of attack, attempting to argue that Julian's work as a brand consultant was so integral to the success of Harrison Ventures during their marriage that it should be classified as marital contribution, subject to division. Ava's counsel, Leo, countered with the original, ironclad prenuptial agreement and the corporate charter, both of which predated the marriage. Motion denied, Judge Ramirez repeated. Thorne launched a third argument and then a fourth, each one more desperate and far-fetched than the one before. By the fourth attempt, the judge's patience had worn thin. She took off her glasses, her gaze sharp and focused on Thorne. Motion denied, motion denied. And just like that, it was finished. What Julian Vance would get from the divorce was his personal effects, his sports car, and the funds from his own retirement accounts. He would receive no spousal support. Child support would be calculated based on his declared income, with a visitation schedule to be determined later. What Ava Harrison would keep was primary custody of their unborn daughter, the penthouse apartment that was held in a trust for her child to grow up in, her venture capital firm, her personal fortune, her everything. It had always been her everything. The gavel struck wood, a definitive sound echoing the opening of the proceedings. In the sudden quiet that followed, as the formal tension in the room dissolved and people began to shuffle papers, Ava methodically placed her files into her leather briefcase. There was no need to rush anymore. Across the room, Julian stood at his table, hissing quiet, furious words at Marcus Thorne. Thorne's face was a mask of professional recalibration, the face of a man realizing the case he thought he had was not the case he was sold. And then Julian looked up. He turned and met Ava's eyes directly for the first time since they'd entered the courtroom. She held his gaze, steady and unflinching. She had nothing to defend, nothing left to perform. She looked at him with the clear, unwavering strength of someone who had sat in her home office at 2 a.m, staring at a screen of digital betrayal, and had survived it to get to this room, and knew she would walk out of it whole. And she knew she would keep going long after. He looked back at her, and she could pinpoint the exact moment he finally understood. Not the legal facts, he'd known those for weeks, but something deeper. The moment he grasped that whatever he believed he was taking from her had never truly been his to begin with, that the power he thought he had touched had never really been within his reach, that the woman on the other side of the room had always been precisely what the name on the skyscraper said, Harrison. His presence had been temporary, her name was the foundation. He was the first to look away. Leo appeared at her shoulder. "Ready?" he asked softly. "Yes," Ava replied. She picked up her briefcase and walked out of the courtroom, down in the underground parking garage, the same sleek garage, the same electric car, the same cool concrete walls and low hum of the charging stations. She sat in the driver's seat for as long as she needed. This time, there were no incriminating printouts on the passenger seat. The seat was empty. In 3 weeks, a state-of-the-art car seat would be installed there. She sat in the silence for a moment. It wasn't like the silence of that first night, which had been the crushing quiet of shock. That had been the silence of standing on a cliff edge that had just crumbled into the sea. This was different. This was the quiet on the other side of the storm, the calm that follows. She started the car. Her Aunt Celeste made risotto. They all ate dinner around the large oak table in Ava's kitchen. Celeste and her best friend Sasha, and Leo and Ava. The conversation was not about the court hearing. It was about Sasha's upcoming gallery opening in Soho, Celeste Sat's travel plans for Kyoto, and an article Leo had read about advances in bioprinting. It was a very good dinner. Chloe Sterling Harrison was born on a Tuesday. She made her entrance at 6:44 in the morning after 20 hours of labor that were long but not unusual. She arrived in the birthing suite at Pacific Maternity Center, where Dr. Sharma had been delivering babies for 14 years. She weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces, had a head full of black hair, and possessed an expression that Dr. Sharma laughingly described as belonging to someone who had already concluded she had matters to attend to. Sasha was in the waiting room. Celeste was in the waiting room. Ava hadn't explicitly asked them to come. She had told them the due date, and when she went into labor at 10 o'clock the previous night, she had sent a single, brief text. They were there when she arrived. This, in its own way, was a complete story. At 6:44 in the morning, Dr. Sharma placed Chloe on Ava's chest, skin to skin, just as they had discussed, just as the latest research advised. Chloe was tiny and warm and radiated the absolute self-assurance unique to newborns who have just accomplished something extraordinary but have not yet been taught that such things should come with anxiety. Ava held her. The room settled into that specific quiet that delivery rooms possess in the moment after a collective held breath, as if the space itself understood that something irreversible had just happened and was granting everyone a moment to absorb it. She looked at Chloe's face. Chloe looked back. She already had that serious expression. It was already perfectly hers. It was the face of someone who had arrived with a clear agenda. "Hi," Ava whispered. Chloe continued her steady gaze. "I know," Ava said. "I have things to figure out too." Her inner voice was the quietest it had been through this entire ordeal, and the most certain. "I thought having her would be the happiest moment of my life, but also one of the most painful because of everything with Julian. I was wrong. Sitting here, I don't feel anything about him. Not victory, not sorrow, not anger, none of the baggage I thought I'd be carrying. I just feel this weight, this breath, this person. I was terrified of doing this by myself, but I'm not alone. I never was. I was just looking for a partner in the wrong place." Chloe shifted her hand, curling her tiny fingers around Ava's. The first week was exactly what the first week always is. The 2-hour feeding cycles, the astonishing and absolute smallness of a 7-pound human, the particular kind of exhaustion that holds, despite everything, something adjacent to happiness but far more durable. The sound machine from the nursery was humming softly in the corner of the Manhattan hospital room. A small sachet of chamomile lay in Amelia's overnight bag. These were little comforts, planned months before for a version of this day that had never come to pass, yet they were still precisely what she needed. Her sister Maya brought food each day, things like soups and sandwiches that could be managed with one hand while the other cradled a newborn, a detail Maya had researched with the same rigor she applied to her firm's financial forecasts. Her Aunt Lena brought the cashmere throw from the nursery on the second day. She settled into the visitor's chair and held Chloe for nearly an hour while Amelia drifted into a profound sleep, the first true rest she'd had since her labor started. When Amelia awoke, Lena was gazing at Chloe with a look of pure private recognition. "She looks just like your grandmother," Lena said, her voice filled with absolute conviction. Isabel, her mother, came on the third day. She was there for an hour, quiet and reserved as always, but just before she left, she placed a small, smooth river stone on the window ledge. It was gray and perfectly shaped, the kind of object one finds by chance and keeps for a lifetime. "For her mobile," she said, "if you like." Amelia looked at the simple stone. "I like it," she said. That same afternoon, an email from Arthur's attorney landed in her inbox. "Congratulations. My office will be in touch to coordinate a parenting schedule." Amelia read it once. She placed Chloe gently into the bassinet, walked into the small bathroom, and splashed her face with cold water, a trick she'd used since she was a girl to force clarity. She met her own eyes in the mirror, exhausted, makeup-free, still in a hospital gown, and, for a fleeting second, deeply content. She returned to her daughter's side, picked up her phone, and replied to the lawyer. "My counsel will handle all correspondence." She set the phone down on the windowsill next to the river stone from her mother and didn't touch it again until the next morning. The final act of their marriage concluded on a Friday afternoon. Chloe was 11 days old. Amelia was sitting at the vast oak table in the Upper East Side townhouse. She was living there for now, a choice that hadn't been explicitly decided but had unfolded organically, the way the best choices often do. Chloe was asleep in a carrier on Amelia's chest. Her tiny face was burrowed into her mother's chest with a fierce resolve, as if sleeping were a task to be tackled with total dedication. Julian, her lawyer, had the final divorce papers sent by courier. They came in a standard manila envelope, nothing ceremonious, just Julian's firm name printed in the top left corner. Amelia opened it right there at the table. She read through the pages, signed her name, and set the pen down. Maya, who had been analyzing new project bids on her laptop from the other side of the table, their Friday check-ins having seamlessly relocated to the townhouse kitchen 2 weeks prior, snapped her laptop shut. Lena, who was brewing a pot of tea, paused at the counter. Isabel, who dropped by with fresh flowers and showed no inclination of leaving, glanced up from her phone. "It's done," Amelia said. After a beat, Maya reopened her laptop and said, "I'll get the blueprints for the Dubai Tower ready for our Monday briefing." Lena poured the tea. Isabel slipped her phone into her purse and said, "Those peonies need a vase. Does anyone know where one is?" Chloe slept on. The morning sun streamed through the tall, east-facing windows of the townhouse kitchen, illuminating the table, the teacups, the peonies, the signed papers, the sleeping infant, and the women who, in their own ways and with their own histories and varying levels of comfort, were simply there for one another. Amelia sipped her tea. It was hot, a little sharp, and utterly real. 6 weeks after Chloe was born, Dr. Evans gave Amelia the go-ahead for light exercise. She began taking 30-minute walks every morning around the townhouse's walled garden in the crisp early spring air. She loved the unique quality of light at that hour, before the day had truly woken up. The blue stone path curved past the manicured flower beds, ran along the high brick wall, and looped back through a small herb garden where Lena grew mint and, later in the summer, tomatoes. The stone felt cool through the soles of her sneakers, and the air smelled of damp earth and the very first hints of green, the hesitant but determined growth of a well-tended garden. From the farthest point of the path, she could see the ornate iron gate. The letter S for Sterling was woven into the ironwork, glinting in the early sun. She never thought about the firm on these walks. She looked at the garden. She thought about her great-grandmother, who had acquired this house at 31, the same age Amelia was now. She thought about Lena at 44, standing at the kitchen counter, waiting for the kettle to boil, and the act of rising each day. "This is mine," she thought. Not the inheritance, not the building, the getting up. That was always mine. 8 weeks after Chloe was born, Amelia went back to the Sterling Group for the first time. It was just for the Monday strategy session, not a full return. She entered the building with Chloe in the carrier, crossed the marble lobby, and rode the elevator to the 14th floor, her professional home for the past 4 years. She noticed that everyone who saw her paused for a moment, an effect that wasn't just because of the baby. The meeting had been orchestrated by Maya with her signature thoughtful precision. The agenda was concise. A plush playmat was set up in the corner of the boardroom. It was even noted on the agenda as an available amenity. A privacy screen stood nearby. The coffee was excellent. Chloe slept for the first 40 minutes, then woke up and observed the presentation on the new Dubai Tower with an expression the COO later described as a healthy dose of skepticism. The board members Amelia saw seemed to agree with the baby's assessment. The meeting was a success. The Sterling Group was thriving. It had always been thriving. It would continue to thrive. 10 weeks after Chloe was born, Amelia called Miss Reed. She made the call alone, not from Julian's office or with Maya at her side. She sat in her own home office, the one with the good lighting and the framed archival photo of the firm's first building from 1962, and she dialed the number. The woman answered on the second ring. "Amelia," she said. "I wanted to let you know," Amelia began, "that everything is finalized. The legal matters are concluded. You don't have to carry any part of this anymore." There was a pause. "Thank you," the woman said. Thank you." "I'm not calling to be kind," Amelia said, because she was, at her core, a person who told the truth. "I'm calling because I pictured you at 29, and I remembered what it's like to believe what you must believe about a man, because the alternative is simply too much to bear. I've lived my own version of that story." Another stretch of silence. "How is the baby?" Miss Reed asked. "Wonderful," Amelia said. "Very serious. She already has strong opinions on architectural design. The woman gave a short, sudden laugh, the sound of someone who had been holding their breath for a very long time and was surprised by a moment of genuine relief. "Good," she said. "She should." "Yes," Amelia replied. "She absolutely should." She ended the call and sat in her office for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen, where Chloe was in her bouncy chair, staring at the light filtering through the window with the intense focus she gave to all sources of light. Amelia made herself a cup of tea, stood by the window overlooking the garden, and thought of nothing in particular, nothing pressing, nothing that needed to be solved. The moment of clarity didn't arrive with a thunderclap, but as a simple thought in the quiet morning light. It was the kind of thought that comes after you have walked through fire and emerged on the other side, standing in your own kitchen with a good cup of tea and a baby fascinated by the sun. The cage was never locked. I was the architect of this firm, this legacy, this life. I designed it, I built it, I understood every single beam and joint, and I let myself think that without a man to come home to, none of it really mattered. But it mattered completely. It just needed the right person living inside it. That right person was always me. Now, the right people are us. The story came full circle, ending where it had started. At Dr. Evans's office, the same building, the same parking structure, the same elevator. It was Chloe's 8-week checkup. Amelia carried her in the car seat that had been a permanent fixture in the front passenger seat of her car since she left the hospital. She walked into the medical center, through the lobby, and up to the pediatric reception desk. After checking in, they sat in the waiting area. Her phone vibrated. It was Maya. The text read, "Arthur's lawyer sent another inquiry about the overseas properties. Julian is already handling it. Just an FYI, don't let it distract from the appointment." Amelia glanced at the message, then at Chloe in the car seat next to her. Chloe was staring at the ceiling, where a mobile of simple, brightly colored shapes was turning gently. It was the kind of thing placed in waiting rooms for this exact reason, and Chloe was studying it with her usual gravity. "Someone is asking about the money again," Amelia murmured to her. Chloe kept her eyes on the mobile. "Julian's taking care of it," Amelia added. Chloe shifted her serious gaze to her mother. "You're right," Amelia said. "Totally irrelevant." She dropped her phone into her pocket. A nurse appeared in the doorway and called Chloe's name. Amelia lifted the car seat, carried her daughter toward the exam room, and gave no more thought to Arthur or his legal motions or the overseas properties or any of the framework of the last 4 months. She thought only of Chloe's weight and Chloe's height. There was Chloe's serious expression, the minimalist wooden constellations turning on the mobile above her crib, and the hand-carved redwood bird from Celeste now hanging among them. "I built the architecture for my company," she thought. "I will build this next one too. I know how. I have always known how. I just had to remember." The most important structure I ever created wasn't a venture fund or a portfolio of companies or a holding entity. It was this breathing, this weight, this particular, specific, and irreplaceable person looking out at the world and deciding already that she has things to figure out. The door to the pediatrician's exam room closed softly behind them. Chloe surveyed the new room with her serious eyes. Ava looked at Chloe. Outside, the San Francisco fog was finally burning off, revealing the true spring, the committed spring, the kind that doesn't apologize for the winter that came before it, the kind that simply begins, the kind that grows. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaning, value, and a story worth carrying with you.